Amina only plugged in the silver flash drive to print the seating chart for their company's grand opening. That was all. But when the folder decrypted, she didn't find the guest list. She found a scanned, one-way first-class ticket to Geneva, leaving tomorrow night. And the terrifying part wasn't the massive offshore bank statement sitting right next to it, showing an $80 million balance. It was the name of the joint account holder. It wasn't her husband's name. It was the name of her younger sister, Clara. If you've ever built a kingdom from scratch, only to realize the people you trust most are quietly digging a tunnel under the castle walls, stay with me. Hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because the trap this woman sets for her husband and her sister is a masterclass in absolute, calculated destruction. And the execution will leave you completely breathless. 6 months earlier, Amina was the undisputed queen of West African real estate. She was 34, a brilliant structural engineer, and the lead developer of the Azure, a billion-dollar luxury eco-resort situated on a private peninsula in Lagos. It was the crowning achievement of her career. Working right beside her was her husband, Femi, charismatic, impeccably dressed, and the chief financial officer of her firm. And working right beneath him was Clara, Amina's struggling younger sister, whom Amina had mercifully hired as the vice president of acquisitions to help her get back on her feet. Amina loved them both fiercely. She trusted Femi to handle the money while she handled the concrete, the glass, and the vision. But over the last 6 months, the Azure had been bleeding cash. Femi claimed it was supply chain issues. Prices for imported steel were skyrocketing. Labor costs were tripling. Femi constantly presented Amina with grim financial spreadsheets, telling her they were on the verge of bankruptcy. He convinced her to sign over her personal equity in the project to a private equity savior, just to keep the lights on and finish the construction. Amina had signed the papers, exhausted and desperate to save her life's work. But sitting in the quiet glow of her home office, staring at the encrypted flash drive Femi had accidentally left in his suit pocket, the horrifying truth clicked into place. There was no private equity savior. The investor was a shell company owned by Femi and Clara. There were no supply chain issues. Femi had been systematically inflating the construction invoices, forging vendor signatures, and siphoning the extra millions directly into their joint account in Geneva. Femi and Clara had been sleeping together for 2 years. They had orchestrated a manufactured financial crisis to steal Amina's entire company, drain its capital, and run away together, leaving Amina to face the massive corporate debt and public ruin alone. Tomorrow was the ribbon-cutting ceremony. The moment the press took their photos, Femi and Clara planned to board a plane, trigger the final bankruptcy clause, and disappear with $80 million, leaving Amina holding a worthless, bankrupt company. A normal person would have screamed. A normal person would have thrown the flash drive at Femi's head and demanded a divorce. Amina was not a normal person. She was a structural engineer. When an engineer finds a fatal flaw in a building, they don't scream at the walls. They rewrite the blueprint. Amina didn't confront him. She put the flash drive back in Femi's suit jacket. She smiled at him over dinner. She kissed her sister on the cheek the next morning. But while Femi and Clara were busy packing their secret bags and finalizing their getaway, Amina went to work. She drove down to the Lagos State Land Registry. As the original architect, she pulled the master blueprints and the municipal zoning permits. She noticed a brilliant, fatal oversight Femi had made in his rush to steal her company. When Femi transferred the ownership of the resort to his shell company, he transferred the commercial deeds for the buildings, the hotels, the pools, the restaurants. But he forgot about the infrastructure. Because of an old, obscure municipal law, the private 3-mile access road leading into the peninsula, as well as the underground utility grid, the massive water pipes and commercial power lines feeding the entire resort, were deeded separately from the commercial structures. Amina immediately legally transferred the deeds for the access road and the utility grid out of the corporate portfolio and directly into a blind trust, a trust completely and solely controlled by her. Then she made 3 phone calls. The next afternoon, the sun was shining brilliantly over the Azure resort. Hundreds of elite guests, investors, and national media outlets were gathered around the crystal-clear infinity pools. Femi stood at the grand podium, looking like a king. Clara stood right behind him, wearing a designer dress paid for with stolen money, trying to hide a smug, victorious smile. Their bags were already in the trunk of a car waiting to take them to the airport. "Today," Femi announced into the microphone, his voice booming over the speakers, "we unveil a new standard of luxury. But as with all great transitions, there must be change. Due to unforeseen financial restructuring, Amina will be stepping down as lead developer today. The private equity board has officially assumed full control of the Azure." A murmur of shock rippled through the crowd. Femi was publicly humiliating her, executing the takeover live on camera so she couldn't fight back in the shadows. He looked over at Amina, expecting to see her break down in tears. Amina didn't cry. She walked gracefully up the steps to the podium. He gently took the microphone from her husband's hand and turned to the crowd. "My husband is right," Amina said, her voice crystal clear. "I am stepping down. In fact, I am officially handing over the keys to every single building on this peninsula to the new owners, Femi and Clara." Femi frowned. This was too easy. Clara looked confused. "They own the magnificent hotels," Amina continued, gesturing to the massive glass structures. "They own the restaurants, they own the pools, but there is one minor detail they failed to realize during their hostile takeover." Amina pulled a thick stack of legally stamped municipal documents from her portfolio and set them on the podium. "They own the buildings, but I personally own the 3-mile road that connects this peninsula to the mainland. And I own the underground utility grid that pumps water and electricity into their beautiful new buildings." The crowd went dead silent. Only the sound of the ocean waves crashing against the rocks could be heard. Femi's face dropped. "Effective immediately," Amina announced, "I am enacting a private toll on my road. Access to the resort will now cost $1 million per vehicle per day. Furthermore, as the sole proprietor of the utility grid, I am shutting off the water and the power to the Azure indefinitely for maintenance." Right on cue, the massive cascading fountain behind them sputtered and died. The ambient resort music cut off. The lights inside the grand lobby went black. Clara gasped, covering her mouth. Femi grabbed the microphone. "You can't do this. That's illegal." We own the resort. You own a collection of dark, dry concrete boxes that nobody can legally drive to," Amina replied smoothly, stepping away from the mic so only he could hear her. "And you have exactly $0 to fight me in court." "We have $80 million in backing," Femi hissed, his charm entirely gone, his face twisted in panic. "No, Femi, you had $80 million, Amina corrected him, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. She turned and pointed to the front row of the audience. Sitting there quietly were 6 men and women in dark suits who had not clapped once. They were the directors of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. "I found your flash drive, Femi," Amina whispered. "I sent the unencrypted ledger and the forged vendor invoices to the EFCC at midnight. They froze the Geneva account at 6 a.m. this morning. Your money is gone. Your tickets are canceled." Femi physically stumbled backward, knocking over a tray of champagne glasses. They shattered violently against the marble deck. Clara let out a terrified sob as the EFCC directors stood up from the front row and walked calmly up the steps of the podium, flashing their badges to the rolling news cameras. Femi and Clara had spent 2 years digging a tunnel to steal the kingdom. They didn't realize Amina had let them finish the tunnel, only so she could lock the doors from the outside and flood it. They were escorted out of the resort in handcuffs, walking past the dead fountains and the dark buildings they legally owned but could never use. Amina watched them go, standing in the sunlight of her own creation. Within a month, their Femi and Clara's shell company defaulted on the property taxes. The state seized the buildings, and Amina, holding the only access rights, bought her entire resort back at a public auction for pennies on the dollar. Every person watching this needs to understand a vital rule of warfare. Never mistake a person's silence for ignorance. When a builder goes quiet, it doesn't mean they have stopped working. It just means they have stopped talking about what they are building. The most devastating revenge isn't loud. It is legal, it is precise, and it uses the betrayer's own greed to build their cage. If you love seeing a meticulous plan come together to crush the wicked, hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment and tell me what you would have done if you found that flash drive. Because in our next story, the betrayal doesn't happen in a boardroom. It happens on a hospital bed. And the secret that gets exposed will shatter a family tree forever.